not enough to survive in this racialized world. We are learning together to thrive. This is Race, Health, and Happiness, and I am your host, Dr. O. Today, my guest is Dalton Higgins, an African-Canadian multi-hyphenate. He is a PR strategist and publicist, author of 6 books, festival producer, National Magazine award-winning journalist, and Toronto Metropolitan University's music professional in residence. He teaches a course called Deconstructing Drake and the Weeknd. This is fitting because he wrote the definitive biography of rap icon Drake entitled Far From Over, The Music and Life of Drake, which is carried in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum Collection in Cleveland. He has been a scriptwriter for the Juno Awards and a former member of Canada Council for the Arts Racial Equity Advisory Committee. And he is the co-host of a podcast called Black Tea, which I love, which is created for and by Black Canadians, where they dig into Black culture, news, and sports. Dalton, welcome.
Hey, how's it going, Dr. O?
I am well, and I am so delighted that you are joining me here so we can dive into some really, really fun and important stuff. So thank you for being here. Now, a question that I always ask, and I ask everybody on the podcast, off the podcast, it's one of my favorite questions. What is your superpower?
My superpower, I would say, is my ability to communicate and disseminate big ideas, capital B, capital I. Okay, so while it's my calling, it's my purpose. So when we talk about the reason I'd sort of describe myself as a multi-hyphenate is I've obviously worked in different sectors. I've worked, currently, as an educator. I've been lecturing since 2009. After I wrote a best-selling book called Hip Hop World, which sort of talks about, emerging youth cultures around the globe, because I've had an opportunity to travel to, different continents, Australia, Europe, Latin America, et cetera. And so there's one thing, the education piece, and then there's, I'm a formerly trained journalist. So my first paying gig where I got paid was like a magazine or a newspaper called Now Magazine, which is Canada's largest distributed alternative weekly news magazine. And I've also, again, spent a lot of time in the media sphere. I've worked, when it comes to festival production, I worked out of this company called the Harbourfront Centre, which is Canada's Centre of Contemporary Culture. That involved engaging, people from across the world, quite literally. Like I've worked on festivals tied to the Persian community, the Chinese Canadian community. Wow. The Jewish community, and it just goes on and on. The Mexican community, pretty much the world. And yeah, so I've worn many hats, so I even struggle. It feels like a bit of a mouthful, kind of saying, hey, I've done this, I've done that, I've written books, I teach a bit. So I just call myself a multi-hyphenate. All right. So within that multi-hyphenateism, I just made this term up.
Okay, you heard it first here, y'all. Multi-hyphenateism. Yes, go on. Yeah, totally. I love it.
That's right. I'm gonna trademark that term now, right? Copyright trademark. Yes. Because a couple of my friends are lawyers, we're going to trademark that. And is this idea, you're just basically circulating strong ideas tied to culture, class, race, religion, et cetera, right? So that's what I do. Whether it's presenting festivals, teaching in a classroom at Toronto Metropolitan University, cranking out books, working in newsrooms, they all involve, at its core, you're circulating, disseminating strong ideas about the world we occupy.
That is fantastic. And I love that sometimes when I ask people what's their superpower, they really pause. But I think where, when I'm asked that question, I don't pause anymore, because I think for those of us who think about what is my purpose, how can I walk in my purpose? How can I have impact? And clearly you're somebody who's had and having huge impact. And you can only do that if you're really clear on what your gifts are and what you've brought, into this world. So I think that is an amazing thing. And I'm looking forward to diving into that. Now, you've been documenting Black music and hip hop culture for close to 20 years now, as I understand it. And so do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey? Like, I know, we talked about your gifts, but maybe it took a while to kind of, figure out how you would be able to have this impact that you're having.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the reasons, students at, at university, at Toronto Metropolitan University and other universities I've lectured at, and I've lectured at a ton, I think what they more appreciate about, when I'm delivering information tied to youth culture, pop culture, music culture, race, class is, a large bulk of it, it's experiential. It's a lot. Many of the things I learned as a young person in Toronto, being born and bred in Toronto, it's through osmosis. Okay, so just to give you an example, so you have people that they'll go to graduate school, they'll do an undergrad, grad school, maybe pursue a PhD. Tied to, Black culture, and many of these, I guess, so-called experts on Black culture are not Black. There's a lot of PhD wielding,
Right.
lecturers, tenured profs that aren't Black. That are lecturing about my culture and my identity. Now, I would say the difference between those tenured profs that aren't Black, that are lecturing about some aspects of our culture, identity, our music, our cuisine, is that, I'm living it, it's part of my day to day, right? So when it comes to, for example, I'll give you an anecdote tied to, let's say, music culture. I grew up in a neighborhood in Toronto that is affectionately referred to, I guess, as Little Jamaica. My parents came here in the late 60s as immigrants from the Caribbean, from Jamaica in particular. And so while other kids were out, hanging out at strip malls and, running rampant, I was hanging out at a record store. Record store, it's called Monica's Records and Cosmetics on Eglinton Avenue West in Toronto. And
is Monica still in existence? It's still there?
Yeah, it's still very much.
Okay, so big up to Monica's. Go on. Okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, totally. It's still there to this day. They don't so much sell records anymore because that's like the Stone Ages, right? Kids like it's just streaming now. They stream music on Spotify. Yes. But when there was such a thing as music retail, you buy records, vinyl, CDs. So I grew up hanging out in a record store. So when people talk, so how I became a little bit of a walking encyclopedia of Black music and some parts of the culture is growing up hanging out in a record store every day. All right. So if you tell me about music from, including the Caribbean, some parts of West Africa, whatever, it's I grew up listening to it. Right. So I can tell you about the songwriting traditions, about, right through osmosis. It wasn't so much that I studied it in public school, but it's just like I grew up around it. I have it all memorized. It's all in my hard drive, my brain. You know what I mean? Right. So,
yeah. Well, it's a different way of studying. It's a different way of knowing, and it's a powerful way. Experiential knowledge is a very, very powerful type of knowledge that is often undervalued in our Western culture, but is so, and I'm sure your students appreciate it, right? It's the person who can walk that talk, not the person who read about walking, right? It's the person who can, have both. So I think that's really, really powerful. So I would say you did study it, just not in the, you know what I mean? The standard Western way of thinking about it. You felt it, you were it, you breathed it, you're living it, right? And have lived it.
Yeah, that's why that's why I do have an awkward relationship with the academy, the ivory towers, because there are a lot of, I've been, lecturing a lot of institutions, and I kind of sit there and I'm like, wow, the people that I know that, as far as experiential is around things tied to race and music culture, that they can sort of dance circles around some of my fellow lecturers that are PhD wielding lecturers. They just don't know. They don't know the culture like that. Mm-hmm. It's all purely theoretical, which is fine, because I think a good combination of theory and practical. Practicum is good, but that ain't it. We have to invite people who are more living the cultures into the academy. I would say that's what I'd say. That perhaps didn't go to grad school, don't have PhDs. Yeah, I think that would be more useful for the students, anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, who are also going to go. The students are going to go into the real world. Many of them, they're not going to become. Most of them are not going to become professors. Yeah. So I think that's key. And so on your journey of you go from being in the record store and studying music that way. What was it like for you on your journey coming to the point that you're at right now? Was it kind of a bit of what you're describing in the academic world? It's like, well, no, this is not the way we do it. Did you experience that or observe that in the music industry here in Canada?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, when I was in high school, back in the Stone Ages, a couple hundred years ago, so I went to this school called Oakwood Collegiate. Now, Oakwood is back then in the 80s, going into the 90s. So obviously, I'm based in Toronto, which is the most multicultural city on the planet. And Oakwood sort of resembled or mirrored that sort of, this Toronto multiculturalism we celebrate and promote. So the school itself was like the United Nations, right? So in my classroom, let's say you're Dr. O, you're like in a class with 30 students.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like 10% are Indigenous, 10% are Continental African, 10% are Caribbean, 10% are South Asian, 10% are Asian, 10% are Middle Eastern, 10%. You see what I mean?
Wow.
That's
That's a mix.
10% are,
Yes.
Latin American, Latinx. That's what I grew up with, right? So,
Okay.
so I think that helped to equip me. And then, as far as my course of study, as far as English literature, so it was a class that, from public school throughout, I thrived in. I'd always get, in the high 90s. Other courses maybe not so much. I wasn't that successful.
Okay.
But it's something about wordsmithing, about something about language, literacy. That I became a bit obsessed and fixated, right? And I always, top mark in English literature throughout my academic career, So what I found now is listening to music, some of the greatest wordsmiths of our time, of before our time, just happen to have been, music. So these are poets. What great poets, wordsmiths, rappers, Afro beats artists, if you're into Fela Kuti or over to Davido, whatever you're into.
Yeah.
If you listen to the deep, rich language, what they're doing, they're using the same, we talk in English literature, we talk about like using literary devices, right? So, things like metaphors and similes, iambic pentameter. Right?
Oh, wow.
That you read in Shakespeare and whatever you read. So a lot of the greatest, a lot of the great dub poets and rappers of our time, they're using a lot of those same literary devices one would read in Shakespeare, you see? But it oftentimes gets devalued, ignored, sloughed off or aside because it's coming from Black people of African descent from the diaspora. So it's not taken as seriously. But if you look at, a Shakespeare sonnet and a Jay-Z lyric, they're comparable. You're seeing a lot of the same literary, things we study in English literature. So that's kind of what I think part of you asked me, what's my purpose or superpower, sort of bringing to light the fact that, a lot of our, things with African retentions coming out of our Black, culture, society, or history, it is on par, if it doesn't surpass much of the sort of, the things we learned that are very Eurocentric, European curriculums, it's very skewed a certain way, but I can sort of introduce you to things that are comparable to Shakespeare coming from the African diaspora, if you're into literature, you see?
Yeah.
So that's part of what I try to do. Yeah.
Well, that's that's a beautiful thing. And of course it's art, and, all of us come originally from Africa. That's the motherland. And so that is the home of art in and of itself for us. But where you talk about that tension of coming from something like English literature, which is very, like you said, Eurocentric, I'm just wondering, either when you were in the classroom or when you were as a student, not as a professor, because there's a different power dynamic. When you were thinking about these issues, did you experience resistance? The reason I'm asking this is because I remember, as a medical student, there would be statements, particularly in a Canadian context, like, oh, we don't have racism here, right? I remember speaking up at, when I was doing my graduate studies in public health and talking about the need for race-based data or the disparities Black communities are facing due to anti-Black racism. And being told, oh, no, that's in the United States. That's not an issue here. So sometimes bringing that different thought into, predominantly white spaces is met with resistance, or even is seen as a threat to the establishment. Did you experience anything like that at times, or was it always welcomed?
No, it was never welcomed. It was actually on the opposite end of the spectrum. So I would say there is a very strong and vigorous anti-Black racism at every step of the way, where I'm concerned.
Pause. He said his views were never welcome. The key word here is never. Dalton is able to look back on this and, chuckle a little bit. But that is a common experience among BIPOC people in white spaces and a source of great pain for many. It is a subtle form of social exclusion, not good for health and well-being. Dr. Sarah Ahmed, a British-Australian scholar, feminist, and EDI expert, wrote a book entitled On Being Included: Racism and Diversity in Institutional Life. She describes how you can be seen as the problem, as a minoritized person, when you bring different perspectives or raise issues in institutional spaces. Basically, you can be made to feel isolated or unwelcome. Now, Dalton may not have raised a problem per se, but just having a different perspective as a racialized person, especially as a Black man, was sufficient for him to experience being shut down in the classroom on a regular basis. The experience of being othered in the classroom also came up in a special episode in season 2 when we explored the experiences of BIPOC dietitians. People with power and privilege can go to extreme measures to reinforce that our perceptions are wrong and we are the problem. So what do you do? Here's an antidote. First, it's important to understand what's going on. If you're being targeted or excluded for challenging status quo, then recognize it. Whether it's happening at school or at work, you need to understand what is happening. Then you need to be intentional about seeking support from peers, mentors, family, or other people you trust. They can validate you, maybe even collaborate with you to address the concern. But most importantly, the answer is not silence. As poet and activist Audre Lorde noted, your silence will not save you. Now, technically, silence might work for a while, and you might have to use it every now and then. But at some point, keeping your head down won't work either, and has also been shown to negatively impact one's physiological health over time. The trick will be selecting how, where, with whom, and when you want to speak up, while preserving your well-being.
But I would say there's a very strong and vigorous anti-Black racism at every step of the way, where I'm concerned. And I tell my students that, I tell my children that, because I don't want them to sort of be growing up in Toronto or hanging out in the US for work opportunities or educational opportunities, walking around with blinders on, or have them feel this sort of false sense of security. I even like to tell the story. It's interesting. I remember years ago, there was something called the Million Men March that was orchestrated, but I think it was Louis Farrakhan, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, and a lot of black organizations tied to social protest movements, that were socially active in the United States. And it was interesting because I wasn't able to go because I had an essay that was due, and I'm kicking myself to this day, decades later, that I wasn't unable to attend in Washington. And it's interesting because what my friends told me at the time, the ones that were able to sort of get on the bus, Spike Lee made this film, get on a bus and get down to Washington to take in this, Black excellence on steroids, is so a lot of people that attended, the Million Men, and they said it was that number surpassed 1 million men. It was a lot of solidly middle class. Like, it wasn't like people had this idea that it's the most visibly and openly oppressed or downpressed, low income. They said what they reported back to me. They said no, it was a lot of like college students and solidly middle class African Americans and others from the diaspora that had had enough. So I think I have this theory where, whether you're a doctor, you're an engineer, you're an author, a best-selling author, an academic, it doesn't matter what you are. It's almost like maybe perhaps you face even more resistance because you're in these spaces that become, more homogenous. So if you're, for example, a medical doctor practicing in Ontario, in Toronto, when we look at it from a quantitative standpoint, I'm guessing that the vast majority of doctors in whatever area you practice aren't racialized, aren't Black. So what that means is that if I'm that Black dentist and it's just like, hey, there's a conference for Canadian dentists, more oftentimes than not, you may be in the minorities from a number standpoint. So what that means is that you're around, your day to day is you're just around non-black people,
That is
European
correct. That is
citizenry 24/7,
100%
which
accurate.
sometimes makes you that much. No, it makes you that much more vigilant in your activism. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So just wanted to help debunk some of the mythology around race. Like you've somehow made it. So like I'm doing quite well for myself. My company is flourishing, and my family's well fed. I make no excuses for that. But what I will say on the flip side is don't for a second think that you're not running into the same hurdles and barriers that any other black person, does, right? You see what I mean, right? Because I'm grown and I'm a grown adult and have, kids and university grads and what have you. No, it's still very much the same.
Yes, I mean, that is exactly how anti-Black racism works. I think folks think that when you reach a certain socioeconomic status or you have a certain level of education, all of those things are good. They're helpful, but they do not disrupt or change anti-Black racism in and of itself, right? Like you're still going to be experiencing the over surveillance, the experiences of people, doubting your credibility, being unnecessarily stopped or carded. Like all of these things continue to occur. And as you said, when you are the only, there's actually evidence that creates another level of stress that actually can impact somebody's mental health. So there's quite a bit of studies on that, even at the neighborhood level, school level, of even to the extreme of psychosis, just really, really having an impact when you're the only. It's very tough.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I wrote a story when I was working out at the news department at Now Magazine, Canada's largest alternative news weekly, comparable to, I guess, Village Voice in New York City, right? Okay. And I wrote a story about this. I said it was about being policed and carded, and how every journalist I knew, journalists that work for the Toronto Star, which is Canada's largest daily newspaper, journalists that work for City TV News or CP2, CP24 City TV News, and pretty much every media, they have been pulled over by police. Working for all of the major media news organizations, that they just happen to be friends of mine, colleagues, right? So again, just to put it out there, right? Like we're here, working professionals, journalists at Toronto Star, at CBC, at Now Magazine, at all of the major media houses in Canada, right? And we'd all been pulled over by police unfairly, right? So just to kind of, put that out there. So if people are thinking this kind of idea around respectability politics, is that if I dress a certain way or I attend a certain school, if I do my undergrad at Yale, that's somehow going to, eliminate any potential for police to pull me over, you're sorely mistaken. I have friends that have gone to, Harvard, and they've been pulled over, they've been dragged. So so people need to know this. I think our children, our youth, our children need to know this, right?
I think it's incredibly important. And I think it's important. So, one of our previous guests, Kika Ojo Thompson, talks about, understanding the game board you're playing on and understanding how anti-Black racism works so that you can be able to maneuver and have better outcomes. But if you don't understand what's going on, there's greater harm imposed. And so for somebody like you who understands what's going on and the importance of your role, how do you see, like right now, like let's fast forward through time, your role as a publicist and PR strategist in particular? Why do you feel, or why do you think for those who are involved in Black music in Canada, that becomes quite important if we're thinking about this game board that we're playing on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the reason I started working in the media and studied media arts and English literature is, so it's this idea around controlling the information, controlling the spread of information, right? So if you look at, I'll give you a couple examples. I don't know, Marcus Garvey or something, right? Marcus Garvey. So he's a, leading Pan-Africanist, and he's a lot of his great work around entrepreneurship, because I'm also very much into entrepreneurism, this idea of sort of owning, you can more control your destiny and make a lot of money. But anyways, Marcus Garvey. So what real revolutionaries and what real forward-thinking, how do we say, like thought leaders, what they consume themselves with is control of information. Okay, so media practitioners, whether you're working as a journalist, an editor, a television producer, a publicist, you work in the communications field corporately. If you're able to sort of control some of the flow of information, the who, what, why, when, where, how, if you're able to sort of involve yourself in a little bit of that, even small 1 iota, a little bit of that, you're going to have a great outcome, right? So what that means in practical terms, to be very pragmatic here, is when you work in a newsroom, if you're a Black editor, a Black like I've been a Black editor, news reporter, and people are wanting to cover something tied to the African Canadian community, just by virtue of you being in the newsroom, it's going to completely radically shift and alter and manipulate the way that story is covered.
If you speak up.
Okay? If you speak up, that's right. If you are vocal and outspoken like I am, and that's why it's interesting that I am referencing, something like Marcus Garvey, is that you can, because you are Black and of African descent, that doesn't necessarily mean you have this, how would I say, activist intentions, like I do, because I just want to see I don't want future legions of Black youth, young boys, Black girls, to have gone through what I had to go through. I want them to have an easier time.
Exactly.
Okay, so there's a bit of how do we say, like martyrdom, as far as, no, I'm going to put myself out there, and make sure that you have an easier time, right? Because it wasn't that easy for me, right?
And we stand on the shoulder of giants who made it easier for us. We're not going through what the generation before us went through, and that is a way of paying that gratitude to the generations to come. So it's a beautiful thing. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. You almost have to do it out of. You have to host and produce a podcast like you are doing. You're doing it both out of choice and necessity. Yes. Okay, because if we have this level of expertise in this area, in this field, because I'm hanging out with a bunch of doctors here, Dr. O, right? and so you have, which means you've obviously accumulated a lot of wisdom, experience, both within your practice and outside of it. And I think it's important that Black, racialized, and also non-Black folk that are interested in this around health, mental, physical health, that they're able to see you out there on this platform, as thought leaders and subject area experts. I think that's hugely important. So I think, so you're doing these things out of choice, because this is what you want to do. You want to produce a fantastic podcast, but I think you want to be doing it out of necessity as well, to feed the community.
Yeah, no, that's it. And so in the music industry, I'm thinking where you're talking about, the need for us to be, or, in media, like that intersection, there's a need for us as Black folks to be represented in these spaces to be able to change the narrative, right? And so that's something that you've been able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when we talk about music, or Bob Marley, the late great Bob Marley, like he also has this lyric, just sort of segue this into this idea around, health and happiness. He says that the lyric, and don't quote me, but this idea, one good thing about music, when it hits you, you feel no pain. Yes. Right? Yes. Okay. So when we talk about one's, mental health, like you can just stick on some headphones like I have on now and listen to some Fela Kuti, Nigerian, listen to some Bob Marley, and you feel better, within minutes.
Pause. Dalton got it right. Bob Marley did say, one good thing about music, when it hits you, you feel no pain. As a doctor and as a descendant of the motherland, I know the validity of that statement. Unfortunately, very few, if any, of my medical colleagues were taught about the healing power of music, even though there are studies that have demonstrated its impact. For instance, in a meta-analytic review published in 2018 in the British Journal of Surgery, the authors reviewed 92 randomized control trials that investigated the effect of music interventions on anxiety and pain during invasive surgery. Their conclusion was, and I quote, "Music interventions significantly reduce anxiety and pain in adult surgical patients," end quote. Now, despite the research, doctors will tend to dismiss or undervalue using interventions like music, which are highly valued in African and other Eastern cultures. The truth is, the Western medicine that I practice has a history that is steeped in colonialism and white supremacy, and that legacy lives on today and taints how we value interventions. What is worse, in my opinion, is that many BIPOC people have internalized this and also undervalue the healing power of music. And I think that's also a consequence of colonialism. Psychiatrist, activist, and author Dr. Frantz Fanon noted, colonialism is a total project, one that does not leave any part of the human person and its reality untouched. We see ourselves, our histories, our communities, and our values through a colonial lens, which undervalues us and the ways of our ancestors. So what am I saying? Am I saying we should take medical advice from Bob Marley? No, that's not what I'm saying here. I'm just saying we need to stop ignoring our own community and ancestral wisdom. We need to recognize its value when we see it and find a better balance that is not completely skewed to a colonial value system. In other words, if your loved one is sick, in the hospital or at home, and they love music, please play it for them. There is healing in that.
So when we talk about one's, mental health, like you can just stick on some headphones like I have on now and listen to some Fela Kuti, Nigerian, listen to some Bob Marley, and you feel better, within minutes. You see, so music has these healing properties, comparable to if I have some physical ailment and I'm doing acupuncture, to get some relief or some form of medication prescription, but music sort of fulfills a very similar mandate, similar mission, and that's what Bob Marley said. He goes, one good thing about music, if you're feeling down, depressed, clinically or otherwise, and you listen to some lyricism from Bob Marley or someone else, you just feel it has this effect, on you, right?
I think for us as African peoples, it has been such a way of keeping us, giving hope during times of whether it's slavery, colonization, or other times of despair. But also, definitely those healing powers that you said, when you think about Bob Marley. Ironically, just 2 weeks ago, I took my father who has dementia, but he always loved and still loves Bob Marley, as well as, of course, Fela is a Nigerian man, but loves Bob Marley. And so we went to the One Love Expo, and he was just immersed, and he was just in the moment, and he knew all the words. And there's a room where there's an African drum, and my dad never talked about drumming before, but there was an African drum there, and he sat down and he began to percuss it really in a way that I'm like, at some point, somebody taught you how to, drum, right? Maybe when you were a boy or something like that. Dad has never mentioned that, but there was a certain level that he was drumming, and it was just such a magical moment. And although, because he has dementia, he doesn't always know what year it is, or he knows who I am, but he doesn't always know where he is. But in that moment, we were immersed in Bob Marley. We were immersed in music, and he was very present, and it was very healing. And I think music, and Black music and African music in particular, is so incredibly powerful. What I, on the flip side, find very perplexing in Canada is that I feel that despite the anti-Black racism in the United States, there is an appreciation for Black music. Now, sometimes it becomes distorted, stereotypical. That's a different thing. But Black music is, or African American music, is valued and appreciated. In Canada, my impression as a listener, you're closer to the industry, but my impression is not so much. It is pushed completely to the margins. Do you have a theory or thoughts as to why that is? Just here up north.
Yeah, totally, for sure. Yeah. The music, Black music, in its entirety, right? So when we talk about Black music, we're talking about anything from the aforementioned Afro beat, Fela Kuti, the Afro beats of Wizkid, Davido, Burna Boy, over to reggae music, dancehall out of the Caribbean. We could be referencing soca and calypso, which with its strong Trinidad and Tobagonian retentions. Yes, yes, right. Yes, and Kaiso, and we could also be referencing, anything, even just to talk about, like, because I'm going to go really deep into this.
Please
as far
do.
as just music, when we talk about, rock and roll, rock music. Now, when I say rock music, rock and roll, people have this idea. This idea, it comes to mind as caricature of maybe like a white male with shaggy hair and electric guitar. But rock and roll, in its current state, it's a historically black music, and it's an African American invention. Okay, because I can't talk about music here without just unpacking some of there's a lot of the falsehoods and mythology around music. So it's an African American invention. So just the 30-second version is when you see Elvis Presley sort of playing his guitar and dancing on stage and gyrating his hips and his and also his songwriting, that's coming directly, and this is not arguable or open to debate, but it's coming from African American iconoclasts that predate him, so Bo Diddley's, and when you hear Chuck Berry saying, "Hey, I'm the real king of rock and roll," and people are looking at him like he's lost his mind, but he is one of the kings of rock and roll, right?
Of course.
Ma Rainey, we talk about playing electric guitars. Ma Rainey, she was playing the guitar. She came out of the church tradition. She was doing this stuff way before any as far as any sort of European involvement. So, and these are hard facts. This is not open to debate. Right?
Absolutely.
Although many you're not learning about this in school, which is very problematic. It's very troubling, disturbing, and deeply problematic. But nevertheless, with music in Canada now, so. We are a bit in the Stone Ages. We're a couple decades behind America when it comes to the engagement of Black music, the celebration of Black music, embracing it at the media level, embracing it at the record label level. So this idea of record labels, you have these major record labels, Universal Music, Sony Music, Warner Music, right? These are big multinational corporations that basically sign and execute contracts with musicians to put them out there into the music ecosystem, the music landscape. And the amount of Black artists in Canada that are signed to major record contracts through, Universal, Sony Music, Warner, it's embarrassing. It's disturbing. It's minuscule. It's next to nothing. I think we've sort of we've in Canada and in Toronto in particular, because Toronto. I'll use Toronto as an example, because we spend so much time patting ourselves on the back for being the most multicultural city on the planet. I think what it's done is it's obscured when you look at hard measures of equality. Okay, so when I'm looking at equality and I'm trying to further investigate anti-Black racism, I'm looking at things like the political situation. Right? Are we represented at City Hall in Toronto? Right? I'm looking at economics, what types of things, around do we own, operate, entrepreneurship, real estate, what types of things do we own, right? Economics, what types of revenues are we generating as a community? So I'm looking at things, real hard measures of equality, not looking at the fact that we can, hold hands and sing Kumbaya and, hey, okay, I'm Asian, you're South Asian, you're Indigenous, I'm Black, and we can drink at the same water fountains. Those aren't the measures of equality. I'm looking at how are we represented at City Hall, politically, economically, how are we faring, class issues. And so we're not faring so well in those areas, right? So if you look at, I'm in Toronto. If you look at Toronto, it's a very wealthy city, and we're the fourth largest city in North America, and we are the most multicultural city in the world. When you look at City Hall, how many Black city councilors do you see down there? How many? Do you want to guess? Right? Yeah. Okay, so we oftentimes over the last 20, 30 years, you will have one. My friend Rob Davis or whatever, I don't know where he is now. I haven't seen him in a while, but he was the lone Black city councilor. There's little to no representation down at City Hall in the corridors of power. You see, so these are the things I look at. So in the music industry, is much the same. When you look at are there great rappers and calypso artists and soca artists and dancehall artists and Afrobeats artists? Yes, there are. By the dozens, by the bushel. There's a laundry list of fantastic world-class artists that happen to be in Toronto that are performing historically Black musics. Corporately, am I seeing that same representation? Not even close. In fact, it's so poor that right now in 2022 and onwards, a bunch of studies, a lot of research has gone into this area. Why is it that I think there's like one black booking agent in a country that is producing a lot of great rock artists and folk artists and country artists, and they're generating a major, massive revenues. There aren't any black booking agents. Booking agents are the ones that get you the work, So it's kind of like Dr. O. If you want to do a speaking engagement and get paid big bucks, if you want to do a keynote, they pay Dr. O $20,000 a pop to deliver a 45-minute keynote. It's your booking agent that's going to book you to get that. Right?
Sorry.
I have a booking. No, this is what it is, right? I have a booking agent, National Speakers Bureau. They book me out to speak for an hour or so and then generate some good revenues, right? But there aren't any black booking agents, when it comes in the music industry in Canada, right? So when you look at, again, the hard measures of where's the money going, where are the resources, who's getting signed, we are scant to non-existent in those areas. But on the front lines, as far as the music presentation, we're there. Okay. No, we're not. No, as far as,
We're not in the structure. So the structure is still rampant with either a colonial perspective or an anti-black perspective, but we're not there. And so we need to increase our representation. So now that makes more sense to me because I'm like, I feel like people enjoy the music and then there's the artist. So I was like, what is going on here in Canada? And we're not like that far away from the United States. Like what's the barrier? But it seems to me it's a structural barrier as we see in so many different areas, right? In North America.
I have a good one for you,
Canada.
Dr. O. In Canada, totally. I have a good one for you, right? This is something I wrote a story about this years ago about like window dressing. I call it window dressing. So what happens is, so on the front lines, you'll kind of see, it's great rappers and musicians and producers, but corporately now when you go into the boardrooms, right, on Bay Street, that are essentially paying the artist, signing the artist, supporting the artist, entertainment lawyers, that's where you see the gaping hole, the void. You see little to no black involvement. You see, so in the media world it's much the same. Like you and your the producers of the show, maybe you watch the news and you'll be like, hey, I watch this CBC show or this show on Global News, and I see, hey, there's a black woman, there's a black guy there. But as far as in the corridors of power, the people that make the decisions, right, the producers and the people that are working in the shadows, the black presence is minuscule to non-existence, you see? So when I say window dressing, what I'm saying is you're going to see things on the front lines, and perhaps I was talking to a TTC driver about this. This guy Julian, he goes, yeah, there are a lot of black TTC drivers, but he goes, the people who are making the real bucks, the real big bucks are in management, and they're the, what I mean? Like, it's not here. We're not making any money relative to. Yeah. So that's what he was. Yeah. He's a TTC bus driver. He just said, he goes, this is where we need to be in management, not just driving buses. Like, I'm happy to drive a bus, but I want to,
and that advancement is an issue. And I think that's what we see in multiple industries, and we see it in medicine, and clearly we're seeing it in the music industry. And then it actually has an impact on what plays out on the ground. So in thinking about that, is there anything changing? Like, I mean, I know that, for instance, you teach the course Deconstructing Drake and The Weeknd. Like, we've started to see some Black Canadian artists really make it. Largely, they make it in the States and come back. But is change happening, or even in the activism and unrest of 2020? I know, when I have interviewed actors and writers, they had said, there seems to be a change in some of the art space. But in the music industry, is there change happening, or what do we need to do to see the change that we want to see?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Is there change happening? Yes. Is it too slow? Is it glacial? Yes. It's too slow. So this idea around, let's say you work, we'll talk about a record label or an entertainment law firm, and you have that lone black staffer, and then now you sort of, which is earned, but a promotion. So they're now sort of in a managerial position. You still have that lone black staffer, So that's what you see happening in Canada. We're very good with what I call like tokenism, right? That's the term, tokenism. So we're very good with that. We're very good with that. So you're going to find that lone black, person in a managerial position or not, sort of put out there as a representative of, to somehow represent the diversity that is taking place within that company or within that sector. And So I think we have a bit of mastery in that area. I think we do a very good job of that. Sort of a token. You have the one black person,
Right.
and if you look at it from as far as a ratio of black and racialized staffers to non-black, and you see it's pretty much remained the same. But so we're seeing a lot of that in the music industry, is what I'd say. I don't see, as far as numbers, as far as like a sort of quantitative growth, as more people getting involved, getting signed, getting great jobs. I know. But I am seeing that lone staffer, that token, that singular person that is somehow here to represent the interests of an entire community, which they obviously can't, getting these promotions, I guess, triggered post-George Floyd-esque promotions. So it feels performative. It
Yes.
doesn't feel like it's enough. That's what I would say, yeah.
So then what do you recommend for like students, let's say Black and BIPOC students and true allies who are in solidarity, but who are right now, early career or students, right? They're the beginning of their journey, either in music or journalism. How do we bring the story, whether it's a story through, as you said, the poetic story, which the artist will do, or the more written observer story that a media expert or journalist would do. What do we need to start changing the narrative? How do we rewrite the story as a collective and not just waiting for that single promotion?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think how we begin to rewrite the story is take I guess entrepreneurship a bit more seriously, right? This idea of I like things that are largely by, for, and about our community. If handled the right way, you'll make a lot of money, and you'll be able to these same concerns won't be as so reoccurring. I would say, right? So. I think some of my I guess more role models. They're American. They're not from here. Because I wrote for some large American magazines, like when I was in university in the late 90s. So I learned from some real trailblazers, tastemakers, influencers, and people that were generate a lot of wealth. So those were my role models, and what I found, as part of their DNA, it was this. They're very entrepreneurial. They say like serial entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So they were not so much. I'm going to sort of wait around my whole adult life to get that stamp of approval and perhaps maybe get that promotion 12 years from now. They were just kind of more like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to, set up shop. I have a strong constituency and demographic base that I can, lean on, rely on. And if I'm operating, if I'm doing things at a, world-class level, like I'm really sharp,
Excellence.
I'm doing things at high, Black excellence, high, artistic integrity, excellence that, you build it and the people will come, right? So I come from more that school of thought. So I stopped spending that much time worrying or wondering what the non-Black community, think about what I'm doing, and more like, entrepreneurs, right? Figure out a way to, control your own destiny. Maybe that's some like Marcus Garveyisms that's sort of bleeding into
I was just thinking that. I was like, this is so interesting that you talked about Marcus Garvey at the beginning, because that's the vibe, right? Like, create our own destiny.
You could control, but control your own destiny.
Control your own destiny. Pause. I just thought we should give a shout out and some recognition to Marcus Garvey, a man ahead of his time. He had controversial views, some of which I do not agree with, but my goodness, for a Black man in the 1920s to have made such a huge mark on North America and the world, we must acknowledge this ancestor. He was born in Jamaica in 1887, and he founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association in 1914. Garvey was a political activist, publisher, journalist, and entrepreneur. He believed that white society would never accept Black people as equals. Therefore, he called for the separate self-development of African Americans within the United States. He led a Back to Africa movement, and he advocated for the development of worldwide Black-owned industries. He promoted self-determination and controlling your own destiny, which is a major determinant of health. I recognize, celebrate, and emphasize that. his teachings have inspired many Black entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and maybe some multi-hyphenates. Well, at least one multi-hyphenate for sure, which is Dalton, who brings up Garvey quite a bit. But in any case, as an ancestor, Garvey is a giant. So for our Jamaican listeners, big up on yourself.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast will be right back after these short messages.
Yeah.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is produced with the support of Toronto Metropolitan University. We are proud to be partnered with TMU, a school that has committed itself to addressing its colonial past, doing its anti-racism work, and moving forward with a mandate to provide an equitable and inclusive learning environment.
I hope you're enjoying this episode so far, and there's more to come. This podcast is made possible by our sponsors and partners, but we need your help too. We have set up a Patreon account, and the funds go towards supporting our students, specifically Black journalism students who work very hard on this podcast, and we make it a point to pay them. The link is patreon.com/RaceHealth&Happy, and you can also find it in the show notes. And check us out on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Our handle is @RaceHealth&Happy.
Now back to the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast.
You can control, but control your own destiny, and it doesn't matter what sector. Like as doctors, if there's some way to, your own practice, and then you have, it's a strong client base that can be anyone really, but it can be, people from the Middle East and European. It doesn't matter. Because you're doctors, you treat everybody equally and fairly and honestly.
Correct.
But if you own the practice, it's just a little, it's not going to be it's going to be less concern around mistreatment and anti-Black racism if you own the practice, or your co-proprietors, or whatever, right? So I'm more from that school of thought. I spend less time kind of worrying about and that's why like my publicity company, like I own it. It's a small company, but the revenues, it's fantastic. It's great. If I'd known this years ago, I would have grabbed my Rolodex from those corporations I worked with and started this out 15 years ago. But one of the core the core messaging is entrepreneurship. Try to own stuff, control your own destiny. If you're into real estate, put some monies together, buy a building, buy a house. I don't know, things that you own, and then you're controlling your own destiny. That's
And in controlling it, like you did mention role models. So were those people that you spoke to? Did you have mentors? Because that's part of it. I think a lot of young people, when they first start out, will say, like I want to go out on my own, but maybe make an attempt, not really understand, again, the game board that they're playing on, because every field has a different game board, and so face challenges. So do you have advice around that? Like what were the role of mentors and role models for you? Was it just reading about them or more interaction and advice?
Yeah, no, mentorship is such a key thing. This idea of standing on the shoulders of those that came before you. And there are a lot of strong, African proverbs. It takes a village to raise a child. It really does. I'm the product of we say in the hip hop parlance, we say like the OGs, I'm the product, I'm the offshoot, the byproduct of people that came before me that were perhaps 10 to 20 years older than me. They taught me some of the tricks of the trade tied to revenue generation and how to better maneuver and navigate the media industries in Canada in particular and North America in general. So I think having a strong mentor or having some, getting that elderly sage wisdom from someone who's been on the planet a little longer than you have, you're going to be able to expedite that process. So if you say, hey, like I'm applying to grad school or med school, and if there's somebody who's sort of been there, done that, and they've been practicing for like 40 years, you don't think they can help you to better equip yourself for med school and post-med school? Of course they are, because they've been there, done that. So why reinvent the wheel? So so mentorship is hugely important. I think in our community is my advice to young people is find somebody who you want to be aspirational. You want to, become the change you want to see or be, Mahatma Gandhi or whatever you're doing, and just find that person, latch on to the person, bother them, harass them, track them down. And they're going to be able to give you, that's all I do. What do they say? Pay it forward. So I pay it forward 24/7. They're a bunch of young people that just happen to be Black and of African descent. They hit me up all the time. They want free information. They want connections to things. I'm there for them because I want them to expedite I don't want them to be consumed with bitter and feeling irritable and miserable and
those barriers.
Consumed with these feelings, because anti-Black racism helped limit their dreams. I don't want that. I don't want them to experience what we experience, like Generation X. No, they should have a much far easier time. So that's why my phone lines are open, my DMs are open, social media. Ask me questions. I'm here to give free information, pro bono, as my lawyer friends would say. Okay,
exclusive. Y'all heard it here first.
That's right. Pro
we have
bono,
lots of.
All right, I want.
You're gonna get lots more. You're gonna get lots more. But I think that's a beautiful thing, and that's so important. You just said some things that are so important for our, advancement individually and collectively, but also our well-being. So what you said about controlling your destiny, that's about self-determination, right? Choosing your path, and that is key for well-being. Because when you're following a path where somebody else, again, is doing that, over surveillance and second guessing you and gaslighting you, that's going to have an impact on your mental health and eventually your physical health as well. That piece where you said seeking mentorship, you want mentors who look like you and don't look like you, but you also want peer mentors as well. So you talked about the mentorship. You want all of that mentorship because that validates you. That, really reinforces your humanity and your own journey. And that also reduces stress when you're able to hear from people who are going through a similar thing or who have already gone through a similar thing. So you might not be fully realizing when you do that, but as you open up your DMs, as you make all that free information is available, that's almost like a prescription. You are providing wellness. You are providing health because that helps people to do better and feel better. So thank you, Dalton.
Yeah,
thank you.
It almost feels even cathartic. Talking to my peers in the media industries, and in fact, I'm a part of this sort of I guess private, or maybe it's not private now because I'm talking about this media group on Instagram. So every sort of highfalutin, the most powerful Black media executives and producers are part of this group that I'm a part of, right? Okay. And so totally, it's a private group, and we share ideas, we share our frustrations, we share our grief, and we also share our successes. But that maybe it's best to keep it largely private because if it gets too sorely out of control, but so that's what we do. We have this little group, and it's been largely, I guess, dormant over the last, it's because it developed during the pandemic is still here, but it developed at the front end of the pandemic, where we're just feeling frustrated and tied to situations happening in our respective office work environments, what have you. But so the peer validation, it's cathartic, speaking to those, in your sector, your field, your profession that perhaps, you share together. No, it's hugely important. Thanks for bringing that up. The other piece I want to, with entrepreneurship, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. With entrepreneurs, this idea of working and striking a healthy work-life balance. Mm-hmm. So entrepreneurs, while on the one hand, successful ones are able to make a lot of money, on the flip side, on the other hand, your working hour, it's not a 40-hour work week. It's more like a 60-hour work week. So right. One has to be cognizant of as far as your physical health, your mental health. Mm-hmm. After I get off this fantastic conversation with you, I'm going to go for my daily walk because that's right, self-care. That's hugely important. If you're not able to get in gym, because I see some of my colleagues, not so much falling by the wayside, but having health issues crop up. Okay, both physical and mental, and it's tied to work, stress at work. Those types of stressors, right? So so the entrepreneurial life, it's while on the one hand it's great, controlling your own destiny, generating large revenues, On the other hand, it can sort of you have to be very careful with your physical and mental health because you're oftentimes working longer hours, work hours, Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's it. It's self-care is key and it's the best investment you can make, right? Is to invest in yourself and your health. Now, I've got just a couple of quick questions because I've got like curiosity questions. Because if I was a student, I would totally try to take or audit or sneak into your class, Deconstructing Drake and the Weeknd. Could you just tell me a little bit briefly about what that course is about? It just sounds really cool.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So the course, it's an undergrad course. I teach right now at Toronto Metropolitan University, which is formerly called Ryerson University. And even before that, I would think it was called Ryerson Polytechnical Institute back in the days. But nevertheless, the course is it's not so much about, so some people, when they hear about the course, they think it's about this idea of just a wholesale celebration of Drake and the Weeknd. So that it's for, Drake and the Weeknd fanatics, that's who should register and take this course. But it's not so much. It has nothing to do with any of that. The course is really about sort of peeling back the layers, critically analyzing and deconstructing the conditions that created the Drake and the Weeknd phenomenon, okay? So when you look at Drake and the Weeknd, you're looking at, so there are a bunch of things. You can look at them through a racial prism, class, economics. There's so many things. So for one, Drake and the Weeknd are two of the top 6 most popular and biggest selling artists in the world, okay?
I didn't realize in the world right now. Hello, big up Toronto.
Oh yeah, in the world.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Shout out.
Oh yeah, and they're from Toronto. So here you have these two black, and Toronto born and bred musicians that are two of the top 6 selling artists on the planet. Wow. And I'm not talking about top selling rappers or R&B artists or pop artists. I mean in general, across music genres.
Wow.
Right? Two black males from Toronto, right, are absolutely destroying the industry. And they're both also going to become billionaires at some point in time, right, in the near future. Mm-hmm. Like that's the type of revenues they're generating. They're going to be billionaires for sure. Mm-hmm. So you'd be hard. So when you look at, for example, Drake, his narrative, his journey, it is from an academic standpoint, because the course is very academic. So when he's black and he's Jewish. His father's African American. His mother is Caucasian, white and Jewish. And his story is just fascinating. Just the way he was able to sort of flip the music and entertainment industry on its head. Because growing up in North America, if you were to tell me, 12 years ago that the leading rapper, the most influential rapper of our time, as far as sales, as far as revenue generation, as far as pop culture, I was gonna say,
be careful with your words. But go on.
Yeah, right?
We don't get emails. We don't get tweets. But would be some, biracial, I guess, black identified, black Jewish kid from Toronto. Like people would have thought you'd lost your mind. Same thing goes for sure. They would have laughed it off, right? The same thing goes for the Weeknd, Abel. That this Ethiopian kid from to Toronto from the GTA would be one of the leading figures in popular culture and be going to a billionaire status within years. Again, people would have thought you'd lost your mind. So in the course we talk about marketing, entrepreneurship, some of the sort of class and race implications tied to both, because one is distinctly Ethiopian, the other grew up in a white Jewish household, but his father's African American. So there's just a lot to unpack, deconstruct, and so it's a great class. So the students, we did it, first offered it last year. It was just overwhelming success. Probably gonna have to make the class a lot larger this semester and for the winter semester, because of the overwhelming interest in the course. But it's not there. Yeah. So it's not a course whether you love or loathe Drake or the Weeknd is irrelevant. It's a course looking at issues tied to class and race and gender and also religion, because Drake is Jewish. I have a whole section tied to Judaism and modern day Judaism as it's sort of practiced here, and his how he interprets the religion and also the black Jewry, because there's this whole sort of black Jewish thing happening. But so it's talking about other things outside of the music. It's not about the music at all. It's about everything but the music. And then of course the music is the obvious thing, right? We talk about scans and streams and whatever. But that is cool. It's just like a, an analysis and deep breakdown of these factors. Yeah, no, I think it would be really cool, even as a documentary. That sounds really, really awesome.
Yeah.
And I think overall, this is just what's so important about your work. Like you said at the beginning, it's being able to take all of these different pieces and bring them together in new and important ways that have folks, both Black and non-Black, think about, music and the industry and the narratives and the different types of narratives that we need to learn about in different ways. So I think that's a beautiful thing. Now, you did mention that with all of this phenomenal work that you're doing, you do have to take time for self-care. Now, there's different levels of self-care. There's self-care like the walk. There's self-care like for some people it's a fete, some people it's carnival, but like really next level of self-care is really the joy. And that's really, our birthright. And so I wonder with all of this, again, phenomenal work that you're doing, I wonder what brings you joy?
What brings me joy? Well, I'm like a closeted I'm a foodie, not closeted. I'm a foodie. So I love to
open.
eat.
Okay.
I'm pretty open, like, because that's pretty much all I do. Like outside of the scholarship and my company, I think my wife and I and my kids maybe not so much, but we like to eat. We like to consume. Copious amounts of food, but not in volume, but as far as a quality, from a qualitative standpoint, not quantity. So I'm not saying here that I'm stuffing my face every day with food, but voluminous amounts of food. But so checking out different restos, different food traditions. For example, Ethiopian. I love Ethiopian cuisine. So we're very well versed on food. So food brings me joy. I would say eating cuisines from different parts of the globe. And then also as a father, I have 2 kids, and they bring me a lot of joy. Being a father, I've been attached to this program. It's a fatherhood program. It's called it used to be called More Than a Haircut. People know it as More Than a Haircut, and it's basically a Black fatherhood. It's to promote positive parenting in the Black community. So I've been attached to that program for like 15 plus years. So it's basically an army of Black men from throughout the diaspora. There are men there that are Guyanese and Ghanaian and, Trini, obviously, Jamaican. It's from everywhere. Kitishan and, you're right, Ethiopian, Eritrean, and it just goes on and on. South African, South Sudanese. Yes. And what we do is in the barber shops on Eglinton Avenue West, in that neighborhood that is affectionately referred to as Little Jamaica, we do these kinds of seminars, workshops about self-care and positive parenting. And we even do stuff tied to health as well, right? We would do things like we'd have doctors, clinical, like blood pressure and stuff, like do like free, like testing your blood pressure and stuff, and just stuff, you know what I mean? Like, bring them into the shops, in barber shops, right? So I think being a parent, that's exciting. That's an adventure in itself. Like for anyone that is a parent or strives to become one or wants to become one, whether through birth or adopting or whatever, however you get there. That's quite adventurous, and it brings me a lot of joy. It's a lot of fun. It's joy, it's heartache, it's frustration, it's beautiful, it's all of the above, it's all of that and then some.
I love that. I love that. And yes, I love that you mentioned this group for Black fathers as well, because parenting while Black is something that we've talked about on this podcast in many different ways, and the challenges with that. So finding a way to come together in a way that it brings you joy and the collective comes together is another kind of peer support way. So I think that is cool. And I can't help the image of thinking about you doing the 2 things that really have sustained us in the African diaspora, which is like good food and then the good music. Like, what more do you need? So yes, definitely you've tapped into the ancestral joy, which is wisdom. So I'll leave
I also like Dr. Yeah, and Dr. O, I like hanging out with, large groupings of Black people, from all walks of life. I like doing that. So wherever I can find that, when I used to work in the festival production, maybe I used to do that down at Harbourfront Center. I would book some big artists like, Mighty Sparrow and some whatever Afrobeats. And then it's just like a sea of like Black people and their allies, that consume Black music and just be in these large spaces, so we can talk about, like you said, like what you're Trini and Nigerian, so talk about jollof, you know what I mean, rice, and also talk about doubles, doubles and jollof, you know what I mean, jollof rice and doubles, roti, rotis or something. You know?
Yes.
So that's what I like doing. I just like being around large groups of Black people, just like, just in Jamaican culture, we call it reasoning. Reasoning is kind of like that corner side chat, like you just chat on the street side. You're just talking about life and love and reasoning, as they say. Like I like reasoning with my fellow Black, I like doing that. That brings me joy as well.
I've not heard that term, but yes, I love the thought about reasoning bringing joy. And I think this summer, particularly in Toronto, although COVID is not yet over, I think people just were so keen to reconnect and engage in that reasoning that you're describing, because it is a beautiful thing and it's a gift. And I think we missed it most when we didn't have it. So I am in agreement with you. That also certainly brings me joy, and also is a piece that has helped us stay healthy and well as a people for centuries. So thank you for being our guest. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your gifts, and thank you for offering advice within to our youth so that they can stand on your shoulders as a giant. So thank you, Dalton.
Hey, listen, thank you for having me, and thank you for you and your team, who I just met, and some of whom I know. I mean, I know Dr. Carl, but what you want to do is, keep doing this podcast, because I like the title, Race, Health, and Happiness, because those three things are inextricably linked. If you're able to maintain your, health and happiness, and as far as you're feeling racially proud and secure, you're not feeling insecure because you are Nigerian and Trinidadian or Jamaican or Guyanese or Ghanaian or South Sudanese, but you're feeling just culturally secure. I think you're gonna have a great life, you're gonna have a really great time at it. That's in my humble opinion.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr. Onye, and she's our host. The show is produced, edited, and engineered by yours truly, Dr. Carl Cabasel. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Our showrunner is Cam, and JL Joseph is associate producer. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson. Social media coordinator is Efwa Mfojo. And Javiera Violeta Duran Quieres is our logistics coordinator. Awit Siem is our business manager, and Tamika E. Latibaudiere is our research consultant. Additional support from Latoya Powell, our special production consultant, and additional voice work by Darrell Carpentier. The RHH theme song is composed and performed by Gold Keys, and graphic design is by Veronica Ng. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at RaceHealth&Happy, and check out the show notes for research that was referenced in this episode, as well as other bonus material. Our website is RaceHealth&Happiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel, and we'll talk with you soon.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is brought to you with help from Toronto Metropolitan University and with support from subscribers and listeners like you. Overcome the obstacles of racism while staying happy and healthy. Donate today at patreon.com/racehealthhappy. We are learning together to thrive. Thank you for your support. The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast is made better by the skills, knowledge, and creative passion of the journalism students who work right here on the show. These students join us from Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for the hard work, folks. We appreciate you.